So, you've stumbled across this post, huh? Chances are, you or someone you care about is staring down the barrel of a werewolf problem. Why else would you be scouring the internet for something like this? Let's not mince words. When it comes to werewolves, the full moon is your worst enemy. But, and this is a big but, don't get fooled into thinking that's the only time these beasts come out to play. You see, the younger ones, those still grappling with their newfound werewolf identity, they can snap on any given night, moon be damned. Take the case of my not-so-lucky friend, Rick. Classic Rick. Always the wise guy. Thought he knew better. "It's just a crescent moon, dude," he scoffed one evening, his breath reeking of cheap beer. He was all bravado, full of that false sense of security. "What could possibly go wrong?" he laughed, stumbling out for what he called a moonlit adventure. Well, I'll tell you what went wrong. The very next morning, the local park turned into a crime scene. Rick's remains, or what was left of them, were littered all over the dew-covered grass. A newbie werewolf, unable to resist the urge even under a sliver of a moon, had decided Rick was its midnight feast. The poor guy's overconfidence had cost him everything. As for me, I don't mess around with lunar cycles. Full, half, crescent. Heck, even on a night when the moon is just a faint outline, I'm not stepping foot outside. I learned my lesson one chilling evening during a waxing gibbous. I still remember the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead as I heard the unmistakable sound of guttural howling right outside my living room window. My heart was doing somersaults in my chest as I cautiously peered through the blinds. There it was. A hulking, drooling werewolf, its fur matted and eyes wild, prowling around my front lawn like it owned the place. I was frozen, gripping my trusty shotgun loaded with silver bullets, praying it wouldn't turn its attention to the house. Thankfully, it seemed to lose interest in my humble abode and lumbered off into the darkness. I shudder to think what would have happened if I'd been outside, basking in the moonlight like a sitting duck. So, let's lay down the law here. When the moon's up, your ass better be indoors. No excuses, no exceptions. You think you're safe because it's not a full moon? Think again. Stay the hell inside, or you might just end up like Rick. All right, you survived your first night by following tip 1 and staying indoors. But let's face it, sometimes hiding inside isn't an option. You gotta step out, right? That's where tip 2 comes in. Arm yourself with maximum killing power. This ain't a fairy tale, folks. You're not dealing with Little Red Riding Hood's wolf here. You need the heavy-duty stuff. Let me paint you a picture. There was this guy in our town, Mike. Big, burly dude who thought he was invincible. He fancied himself a werewolf hunter after hearing some local tales. Armed with nothing but a hunting knife and some serious guts, he went out one night to make a name for himself. Big mistake. They found him the next day, or rather, what was left of him. That knife of his barely made a scratch on the beast that got him. Now me, I don't take such risks. When I step out on a risky night, I'm armed to the teeth. My go-to, a sturdy axe, a crossbow, and my trusty old rifle with silver-tipped bullets. Oh, and let's not forget mercury-encased rounds. Nasty stuff for a werewolf. There was this one time I had a close call. I was tracking what I thought was a lone wolf. Turned out to be a werewolf. As it lunged at me, I managed to shoot it with a mercury round. The thing yelped and stumbled back, giving me just enough time to take aim with my crossbow. Silver-tipped bolt right through the heart. It was down and out before it knew what hit it. And for those of you thinking a bit more defensively, tasers. They're a godsend for a quick getaway. Zaps the hell out of them, buys you some precious seconds. Saved my hide more than once when I found myself in a tight spot. So, remember, when you're up against a werewolf, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You want stopping power, something that hits hard and hits true. Silver, mercury, electricity. These are your best friends. Get armed, stay smart, and maybe you'll live to tell the tale. Alright, if you're still with me, congrats on not being werewolf chow yet. You've holed up during the full moon and armed yourself to the teeth. Now, let's talk defense. Specifically, one of nature's gifts in our lycanthrope nightmare. Wolfsbane. This little purple flower isn't just for show, it's like kryptonite to those furry freaks. Wolfsbane, also known as monkshood, is seriously toxic, and for reasons I can't explain, werewolves hate it. Maybe it's the smell or some mystical mojo, but it works. Case in point, my neighbor, Sarah. She loved gardening, had all sorts of plants and flowers, but no wolfsbane. One night, a werewolf tore through our street like a furry tornado. Sarah's house? Demolished. It was like a scene from a horror movie. If only she had planted some wolfsbane around her garden, maybe, just maybe, she would have had a fighting chance. Me? I've got wolfsbane all around my house. It's like a purple, poisonous moat. One evening, I heard this scratching and growling outside my window. Peeking out, I saw this massive werewolf, snarling and snapping at the air. It was right in my wolfsbane patch, looking like it wanted to come in, but couldn't. The thing was actually recoiling from the plants, whining like a beaten dog. It eventually backed off, disappearing into the night. So here's the deal. Plant wolfsbane wherever you can, around your house, in your garden, hell, even in pots inside your home. It's a simple, effective way to keep those beasts at bay. And hey, it adds a nice touch of color too. Just remember, wolfsbane is also toxic to us, so handle with care. You're trying to repel werewolves, not poison yourself. Stay safe, stay smart, and let the power of plants protect you. If you've been following along and taking notes, you're doing great. You've got your safe space during full moons. You're armed like a medieval knight, and your place probably looks like a wolfsbane nursery by now. Next up, we're diving into a mix of old-world wisdom and straight-up alchemy, using mercury, silver, and certain herbs to keep those walking rugs at bay. Now, let's get something straight. Silver and mercury are like the flu to werewolves. I learned this the hard way. A few years back, there was this local legend, Old Man Jenkins. He swore by his silver amulet, said it kept him safe for decades, but he scoffed at the idea of adding mercury or herbs to his arsenal. One night, he encountered a particularly nasty werewolf. The silver alone wasn't enough. They found him in the woods, silver amulet still around his neck, but it didn't do squat to save him from those claws and fangs. I took that lesson to heart. In my world, I don't just rely on silver. I've got mercury-laced traps around my property. Nasty stuff, but effective. And in my pockets, always a mix of rye, mistletoe, and mountain ash. Call it superstition or call it survival. I don't care. I've had close calls. Too many to count. There was this one time, out in the woods, tracking what I thought was a regular wolf. Turned out to be a young werewolf, probably on its first hunt. I could tell it was confused, scared even, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. It cornered me against a tree. That's when I threw the mix of herbs right in its face and jabbed it with a mercury-coated knife I always carry. The reaction was instant. It yelped and recoiled as if I'd thrown boiling water on it. Gave me just enough time to get the hell out of there. So, here's your fourth tip. Don't underestimate the power of alchemy and herbs. Mix them into your defense strategy. Silver bullets and blades are great, but when you add mercury and a pouch of the right herbs, you're not just prepared. You're a walking nightmare for any werewolf unlucky enough to cross your path. Stay vigilant, stay prepared, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive another night. You're still here, which means you're either really lucky or you've been paying attention to these tips. Good on ya. We've covered a lot of ground already, but here's something equally crucial. Avoid desolate areas at night. Sounds obvious, right? But you'd be surprised how often this simple rule is ignored, often with fatal consequences. Let me lay it out with a story. There was this couple, Lana and Tom. Loved the thrill of nighttime adventures, always seeking deserted places for their romantic getaways. Despite warnings about a werewolf sighting in the area, they decided to have a midnight picnic in the old quarry outside of town. No lights, no houses, just stars and their love for each other, they said. Well, their love story ended abruptly that night. Search parties found their campsite the next day, torn to shreds. Lana and Tom were never seen again. That quarry? Prime hunting ground for a werewolf looking for an easy meal. Now, I'm no romantic buzzkill, but when it comes to werewolves, I don't play around. I avoid lonely hikes, deserted roads, and abandoned buildings, especially after dark. It's just asking for trouble. Once, while driving back from a friend's place, I took a shortcut through a secluded forest road. Big mistake. Halfway through, my truck's engine died. Just my luck. There I was, alone, in the middle of nowhere, with the moon casting eerie shadows through the trees. Every rustle of the leaves had me on edge. I locked myself in and waited for daylight. I heard howls in the distance, but nothing came close. By dawn, I managed to get the truck running again and hightailed it out of there. Never took that road again. So here's your next survival tip. Stick to well-lit, populated areas at night. Werewolves hunt where they can isolate and overpower their prey. You might think a quiet walk under the stars is romantic, but remember Lana and Tom. Keep your adventures to daylight hours and leave the moonlit escapades to the werewolves. Stay safe, stay smart, and stay out of desolate areas when the sun goes down. If you've been soaking in all the advice so far, you're doing way better than most. But here's a tip that might surprise you. Get yourself some big dogs for protection. I'm not talking about your average lapdogs. I mean the kind that makes a werewolf think twice. Here's a sad story to chew on. My old friend Pete, a loner living on the outskirts of town, thought he could handle things himself. Didn't believe in keeping dogs. Said they were more trouble than they were worth. One night, a werewolf came prowling around his property. Pete, armed and ready, thought he had it under control. But werewolves are cunning creatures. It outmaneuvered him, and well, Pete's story ended in a way I'd rather not detail. If only he had a couple of big, brave dogs, they could have warned him. Maybe even scared the creature off. Me? I've got two massive Rottweilers, Thor and Loki. Trained them myself to dislike anything wolf-like. One night, I heard them going ballistic in the yard. I rushed out, shotgun in hand, to see them standing their ground against this massive werewolf, snarling and baring their teeth. The beast was hesitant, pacing back and forth, clearly unnerved by my fearless hounds. That standoff gave me the chance to take a clean shot. The werewolf bolted, wounded but alive. Thor and Loki saved my skin that night. So, tip number 6, big, loyal dogs can be a lifesaver. They're not just pets. In a world where werewolves are more than just a scary story, they're your early warning system and your first line of defense. Train them well, treat them right, and they might just save your life one day. Remember, in the fight against werewolves, every advantage counts, and a couple of brave canines could be the difference between life and a very gruesome death. All right, if you've been following these tips and you're not yet wolf chow, you're doing something right. Now let's talk traps. And I don't mean your garden variety mouse traps. We're dealing with werewolves here, and that calls for some heavy-duty hardware. Take Carl's cautionary tale, a guy from the next town over. Carl fancied himself a modern-day Rambo, decided to take on the local werewolf. He went into the woods with a couple of bear traps and a hunting knife. Big mistake. They found him later, or what was left of him anyway. The traps? Triggered, but empty. A werewolf isn't just some oversized pup. It's cunning, brutal, and vicious. Now, let me walk you through my setup. I've got an arsenal of traps around my property, each designed for maximum impact. First, there are the pit traps. I'm talking about 6-foot-deep holes dug at strategic points, camouflaged with branches and foliage. At the bottom, silver-coated spikes wait to impale anything that falls in. I check these daily. It's essential maintenance to keep them hidden and effective. Next, I've got these monstrous steel traps. Think bear traps on steroids, laced with mercury. I place them in the pathways and trails leading up to my place. The mercury is a nasty touch, But when it comes to werewolves, you can't pull punches. And here's my personal favorite, tripwire nets. I've rigged these in the trees around my house. Trip the wire, and down comes a net, interwoven with silver threads. It won't hold them for long, but it gives me enough time to get there and finish the job. One night, these traps proved their worth. I heard the metallic snap of a steel trap, followed by a blood-curdling howl. Armed and cautious, I approached to find a young werewolf. Its leg mangled in the trap's unforgiving jaws, mercury doing its toxic work. I ended its misery with a silver bullet. It's not a job for the faint-hearted, but it's survival. Remember, setting up traps is as much an art as it is a science. Placement is key. You want to cover your blind spots without making your yard a no-go zone for yourself. And for fuck's sake, remember where you put them. There's nothing worse than outsmarting a werewolf, only to get caught in your own trap. So, gear up, plan smart, and turn the tables on those nocturnal nightmares. You're still alive and kicking? Good. You've got guts. But now, let's talk about one of the riskiest moves in the werewolf hunter's playbook. Following the werewolf home. It's a high-stakes game, but if you play it right, it could end your nightmare once and for all. Let me tell you about Danny, a guy I once knew who thought he was a hotshot hunter. Danny decided he'd track a werewolf back to its lair. He was all talk, no strategy, followed the beast one night, and never came back. We found his camera in the woods, the last footage showing him walking into an abandoned warehouse. He went in, but never came out. Tracking a werewolf to its den without a plan is a one-way ticket to the grave. Now, my approach. Calculated, cautious. I once tracked a werewolf, but I did my homework first. I learned its patterns, its hunting grounds, stayed out of sight. This thing had made an old farmhouse its lair. I waited till daybreak when it was vulnerable. Werewolves, you see, they're humans during the day. I found it there, asleep. It was a woman, no older than 30. In her human form, she was no match for me. But it's a heavy decision. You're ending a human life, not just a monster. I took no joy in it, but it had to be done. If you decide to track a werewolf to its lair, remember this. You're not in a movie. This is real life, and it's deadly. You need a plan, backup, and the right gear. And you need to be prepared to make tough decisions. It's not just about hunting a monster. You're dealing with a human being, cursed and dangerous, but human nonetheless. If you're not ready to carry that weight, don't even think about it. So tip 8, follow the werewolf home, but only if you're prepared for what comes next. It's a gamble, with your life on the line. Do it right, or don't do it at all. Remember, in this game, the stakes are as real as they get. By now, you're not just surviving. You're learning the art of the hunt. But here's where things get a bit unconventional. Tip 9. Black magic. Yeah, you heard me. Sometimes the old ways pack a punch modern tactics can't touch. I'm talking about reciting an incantation, specifically a werewolf's Christian name, 3 times. Sounds like a bunch of hocus pocus. Let me share a story. There was this old lady in our town, Mrs. Whitaker. People said she dabbled in the occult. Most of us thought she was just a harmless eccentric until a werewolf started terrorizing the neighborhood. One evening, Mrs. Whitaker confronted the creature. Witnesses say she called out a name, John, John, John. And just like that, the werewolf collapsed, transforming into a man right in front of everyone. That man was John Harker, missing for months. Turns out, he was the werewolf, and Mrs. Whitaker had somehow figured out his human identity. Now, I'm a skeptic by nature, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. So I started digging into this black magic angle. Found out that in some lore, knowing a werewolf's human name gives you power over them. It's like their tie to humanity is their one weak spot. I had my chance to test this theory not long after. A werewolf had been spotted near the edge of town, and I managed to track it down. It was a young woman this time, lost and confused in her werewolf form. I remembered a missing person poster, Emily Johnston. In a moment of sheer, "What the hell?" I shouted. "Emily! Emily! Emily!" To my amazement, she stopped in her tracks, whimpered, and transformed back into her human form. I was stunned. It felt like a fluke, but it worked. So, tip 9. If you can, find out the werewolf's human name. It's a long shot, but if you can recite it, you might just save a life, including your own. Remember, werewolves are cursed humans. Sometimes the old magic can reach the person inside the beast. It's a wild card, but in this game, every trick counts. All right, you've made it to the final tip. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Now, this last one, it's a bit dark, and let's be honest, pretty fucked up. But in the werewolf hunting game, sometimes you've got to play dirty. Tip 10, have a slow friend as bait. Yeah, you heard me right. Before you get all high and mighty, hear me out. There was this duo, Hank and Jerry, a couple of thrill seekers who loved poking the bear, or in this case, the werewolf. They had this twisted game. See who could outrun the other when chased by a werewolf. Fucked up, right? Well, one night, their luck ran out. Jerry, the slower one, tripped. Hank didn't look back. They found Jerry's mangled body the next morning. Hank? He got away. But he was never the same again. Guilt ate him up inside until he was just a shell of a man. Now, I'm not suggesting you trip your buddy when a werewolf is on your heels. But let's face it, in a life or death chase, you don't need to be Usain Bolt. You just need to not be the slowest runner. It's harsh, but that's the reality. I found myself in a similar situation once. I was out with a guy I barely knew, tracking a werewolf. Shit hit the fan, and we found ourselves running for our lives. This guy, bless his heart, was no athlete. He was lagging behind, huffing and puffing. I had a choice: slow down and help him, or save my own skin. I won't lie, I chose the latter. I heard his screams as the werewolf caught up to him. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I survived, but the guilt, that shit stays with you. So, the final tip. If you're going to dance with werewolves, make sure you're not the slowest dancer on the floor. It's cruel, it's brutal, but it might just keep you alive. And if you can live with that choice, with that weight on your conscience, then maybe you're cut out for this werewolf hunting business after all. Just remember, every choice has its price, and sometimes it's a hell of a lot more than you bargained for. You've made it through the 10 tips. You're either seriously badass or just plain lucky. But here's a bonus, something that doesn't quite fit into any neat category but might just save your ass. Trust your instincts. In this werewolf hunting gig, you can have all the silver bullets, wolfsbane, and traps in the world. But sometimes, it all comes down to that gut feeling. That primal, deep-down sense that screams, something ain't right. Case in point. There was this time I was in a bar. The night was young, and the crowd was lively. But then, this guy walks in, and everything in me just screamed, danger! He was charming, sure, but his eyes, they were like looking into the abyss. I kept my distance, watched him. Sure as shit, later that night, he transformed in an alleyway, right outside the bar. If I hadn't trusted my gut, I might have been his midnight snack. Your instincts are the sum of all your experiences, knowledge, and sometimes a little bit of that unexplainable something. In this world, where the line between man and monster gets blurry, listening to that voice in your head might be what keeps you on the right side of the grave. So, there you have it. The final piece of advice. Trust your instincts. They're your built-in survival mechanism, honed by evolution for just this sort of shit. Stay alert, stay alive, and remember, in the world of werewolves, the only predictable thing is unpredictability. Keep your wits about you, and maybe, just maybe, you'll live to hunt another day. Good luck. You're gonna need it.